books, and insane asylums. Hello everybody, my name is Jordan Ward and this is my APUSH project. And for this assignment, I was tasked with creating a video that told about the reform movements and three major players within the 1860s that changed that changed liberal media in America at the time. And the three people I selected out of all the many countless ones there is, we talked about the major movement, which is transcendentalism, and two of those very key authors in that movement, Poe and Walter Ralph Emerson. The last person is Dorothea Dix, famously known for her involvement with mental health, which we will actually touch on now. Dorothea Dix. Now, a lot of people don't know her as a personal person, besides all her work with the mentally ill and the prison reform. Because in the 1860s and 1850s, honestly, that there wasn't a lot of laws that protected prisoners, nor did they have much comfort. Honestly, you were just thrown in a quote-unquote basement, and you were just meant to serve your time forever, how long you were supposed to serve it. This led to, obviously, bad conditions within prisons with, no heating, barely any food, and obviously the quality of life was very poor. So, and who changes all this? Obviously, our very famous lady here, Dorothea Dix. Now, you're all wondering, okay, so she did all this great stuff, but why? Well, for why, we have to reach into her background a little bit. So, allow me to take on you this wonderful, mystical, fantastic trip to imagination / the Dorothea Dix story. Dix. She was born in 1817 in New Jersey under a father who was a religious fanatic and three other siblings. Now, because her father was a religious fanatic, this made her hate being at home. Obviously, she was very different from a lot of people at her time, where a lot of women basically kind of fell into the mold that whatever society gave them. In comparison to her, she was a bit of a rebel. But an intellectual rebel, if you may have it. So, what do we do about this? Mrs. Dix, at the age of 14, starts teaching. Now, you're thinking, okay, you're only 14 years old. How the hell can you teach? But remember, this is one person who founded American history. I would hope that she was somewhat to the level of intelligence that she had. But anyway, so she teaches at the age of 14 and then later on forms schools for girls. Now remember, the American education system at the time was very poor. Women weren't educated at all. They were expected to do a lot of housework, and men sought a lot of learning how to read and write, while women were expected to be the lower vessels that obviously the religion at the time had them believe. Mrs. Dix didn't agree with that. So she creates two schools, the Dorothea Dix Mansion, which basically was a school for girls, and the Dorothea Dix Charity, which was a school for poor children that could attend, that couldn't obviously afford. This leads her on to writing multiple textbooks and going ahead and making reforms towards education. Now you're talking about, but didn't she do anything with prison life? I'm actually about to get back to that now. Mrs. Dix goes ahead and she's teaching Sunday school in 1841. I never said she diverted from Christianity. But in 1841, she goes ahead and she visits a prison to teach Sunday school. And here she sees the very poor conditions of the prison home. Obviously, as I talked about earlier, this place didn't have any heat, barely any running water. It was a doldrum. Hell on earth. I told you, they basically threw you in the basement back then and just said, have at it, and whatever happened to you, happened to you. This Miss Dix, of course, takes Massachusetts State, and it actually has them expand the budget to go ahead that these atrocities in the prisons don't happen anymore. But she's not fine with that. That's not enough. As I said, she became obsessed with this necessarily. So she goes nationwide, and she goes ahead and she takes documents and creates this giant record of mental ill asylums and prisons that have all these problems. And she basically creates the Dorothea Dix record, which is presented to the Pope, and which moved the Catholic Church to go ahead and reform insane asylums and prisons that they ran, so that obviously, so there's some improvement could be done. This broke multiple levels of foundation that we had about the mental ill, because being mentally ill was necessarily, if you had any bad case of necessarily schizophrenia or anything like that, you were just thrown into a jail and said feel better without any treatment. She brought on the idea of rehabilitation, which obviously changed the idea that we think about. We think about the mentally ill now. Obviously nowadays we just don't say, oh hey, you'll feel better. No, we actually take steps towards treating them so that society can make progression. Her influence now. Obviously, prison reform doesn't really mean anything in the large scope of things. This is the 1860s. Right now, two countries are getting ready to go ahead and tear each other's heads off. The Union's screaming at the South, and the South's leaving the Union. What does prisons have anything to do with all of this? Well, I can tell you that after the Civil War, what ends up happening is that Miss Dix goes ahead and changes the infrastructure of America. And if you change the infrastructure of any country, you should be hailed a hero, but she doesn't get as much credit as she deserves. So, for those of you who don't know what transcendentalism is, and excuse me for butchering that word, but what it is, was in a way a religion for intellectuals that set out that the point where when one does enough soul searching, he finds another level of enlightenment about himself, thus reaching this necessarily new power. And Poe and Emerson do a lot to convey that. Now, Poe, as we obviously well know him as a romanticism writer earlier in the century, also talks about transcendentalism, and so does Emerson. These guys were obviously two people that Poe, while also being the very depressed soul that he was still very brilliant for his time. Emerson, for him being obviously a diversion from the church, and basically creates this phenomenal standstill of what we now know today. As we read Emerson, you can find multiple of citable quotes anywhere. They were a big deal. See, you had multiple levels of writing at the time, and it'll be shown by this diagram. Which you now see.
Run it, but I'll show you how to coach. Here comes Chris Paul. The lob. The jam! Oh, what a monster jam by DeAndre Jordan!
Basic religion, same thing over and over again, whatever. Then you had reformists. These were people like Douglas and Stowe who are trying to change the world in some ways, but they still held some type of superficiality. The elite writers of the time, Hawthorne, Poe, Emerson, etc., exceeded at the very top. Those people were transcendentalists and obviously the best writers of the time, because they sought out to dig so deep into themselves and required them who followed their movement to do so, that they were able to change themselves so that they can reach some state of a new knowledge. Because, quoting Sun Tzu from The Art of War, knowing yourself is half the battle. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you fear not the result of 100 battles. Which Emerson, Poe, Hawthorne, these guys achieved that. So, to sum up what everything this video is talked about, first off, we're talking about books in insane asylums. Books being Poe, Emerson, and those guys who changed the way that you thought because they're seeking another sense. And Mrs. Dix, which obviously a lot of people was just like, oh, she's just prison reform, but she changed the infrastructure of America and obviously had a profound effect. Seeing that the fact that she had enough effect to where when she personally reported this to the Pope personally made an issue to go ahead and change prison movements. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It was a pleasure shooting it, definitely writing the script, and I hope that obviously this has been somewhat source of enlightenment to you. So this is Jordan Wars with my partner Letaba, and we will go ahead and Stay classy.